A child who changed the world. The morning sun rose quietly over the dusty streets of a small village in northern India. The world outside was waking up. Vendors setting up their stalls, women fetching water, and the faint hum of school bells echoing in the distance. Amidst all this life, a small boy named Arav was sitting on the steps of a broken school building, clutching a tattered notebook. He was only 10 years old, but his eyes carried a depth far beyond his years, eyes that had already seen hunger, loss, and struggle. His father had passed away when Arav was 5, leaving his mother, Mira, to raise him alone. She worked as a cleaner in the local hospital, earning barely enough to keep them fed. Yet, every morning, she would wake Arav with the same words. Greater than, go learn, my son. Someday, you'll build a life bigger than this village. Arav believed her. He loved learning more than anything. Numbers, letters, the stars, everything fascinated him. But his school barely had books, and electricity was rare. The teacher often came late, and sometimes not at all. Still, Arav would sit outside the classroom, copying old lessons, drawing diagrams of things he only imagined. One day, a storm hit the village. The small solar light they had at home broke, leaving them in darkness for weeks. Mira would cook in the dim glow of a candle, and Arav struggled to read. Frustrated but determined, he began tinkering with discarded wires and old batteries he found behind the hospital. Maybe light doesn't need to be expensive, he whispered to himself. The first spark. Arav spent nights experimenting with bits of metal, wires, and tiny bulbs from broken torches. He didn't have tools, just curiosity and persistence. When the candlelight ran out, he worked under the moon. Neighbors would pass by and laugh softly. Greater than, he's wasting time, they'd say. He's just a poor boy with dreams too big for his hands. But Mira never stopped him. She watched silently, her heart swelling with both pride and fear, pride in his passion, and fear of the world's cruelty toward dreamers. After weeks of trial and error, one night, Arav connected his little creation to a battery he'd salvaged from an old radio. When he flipped the switch, the bulb flickered, then glowed steadily. Light filled the small room. "Ma," he cried, "look, it works." Mira rushed over, her eyes shining with tears. That single bulb, glowing faintly, seemed brighter than the sun itself. For the first time, their home wasn't in darkness. But for Arav, that was just the beginning. A dream ignited. He began making small lamps for neighbors using scraps and waste batteries. He charged nothing, saying, "Greater than, everyone deserves light." Soon, every hut on their street had a faint, warm glow at night, the light of a child's invention. One day, a school inspector visited the village. Seeing the homemade lamps, he asked who had made them. When the villagers pointed to Arav, the man was astonished. "You built these yourself?" he asked. "Yes, sir. From waste materials." The inspector took photos and later shared them online with the caption, "Greater than, a 10-year-old village boy brings light to dozens of homes using garbage." Within days, the story spread. Reporters came, government officials visited, and suddenly, Arav's small world was filled with cameras and questions. But he wasn't seeking fame. All he wanted was knowledge. The invitation. A few weeks later, a letter arrived, thick paper, gold-embossed edges. Arav opened it carefully. It was from the National Science Foundation, inviting him to Delhi to present his invention. The villagers celebrated, and Mira wept with joy. But there was one problem. They had no money for the journey. That night, Mira quietly sold her wedding necklace, the last piece of gold she owned. When Arav found out, he cried, but she held him close and said, "Greater than, what use is gold if it can't buy your dream, my son?" So they took a bus to Delhi. It was the first time Arav had seen tall buildings, clean streets, and endless lights. At the science fair, he stood among hundreds of brilliant students, all with polished gadgets and professional displays. His project looked small, made of wires and tape, yet when he spoke about it, people listened. He explained how light could be made affordable for villages, how children could study at night, and how waste could be turned into energy. His words came from the heart, not from textbooks. By the end of the fair, he received a standing ovation. A man from an international NGO approached him and said, Greater than, we want to help you bring this to more villages. Arif's journey had just begun. Changing the world. Over the next few years, with support from scientists and volunteers, Arif helped design Light for All, a small initiative that turned discarded materials into solar lamps. The project grew across states, then countries. His invention lit up remote schools, refugee camps, and hospitals. He was only 14 when the United Nations invited him to speak at a Youth Innovation Summit in Geneva. Standing before world leaders, Arif said, "Greater than, I am not special. I am only proof that one small idea can change millions of lives. If we light one candle, others will follow, and soon, the world will never know darkness again." The audience rose to their feet. Many had tears in their eyes. From that day, Arif became a global symbol of hope, the boy who turned darkness into light. The price of a dream. But even as fame surrounded him, Arif never forgot his roots. Every year, he returned to his village to visit his mother. She had fallen ill from years of hard work, but she smiled every time she saw the glow of his lamps lighting up the houses. "I told you," she whispered one evening, "you'd build a life bigger than this village." Arif held her hand and said softly, "Greater than, you gave me that life, Ma. You were my first light." When she passed away a few years later, Arif was devastated. Yet her words continued to guide him. In her memory, he founded the Mira Foundation, dedicated to bringing education and renewable energy to children in poor regions. He built schools powered entirely by solar energy. He trained young students in innovation and problem solving, believing that the next great idea could come from anyone, anywhere. The final tribute. One evening, years later, Arif returned to his village once again. The dusty paths were now lined with bright lamps, all powered by solar panels his foundation had installed. The old school had been rebuilt into a modern learning center named Mira Public School. Children ran around laughing, holding tablets and reading books under the bright white lights. As he stood there, an old villager approached him and said, "Greater than, you've truly changed the world, Arif. Who would have thought the boy who once searched trash for wires would bring light to the world?" Arif smiled humbly and replied, "Greater than, I didn't change the world. I just helped others see it." The legacy. By the time he turned 25, Arif's work had reached over 40 countries. His designs were taught in engineering programs, and his foundation had helped millions of children study at night. He refused corporate offers worth millions, saying, "Greater than, my light belongs to everyone." He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, but when reporters asked what it meant to him, he said, "Greater than, awards don't matter. What matters is that somewhere, tonight, a child can read because of what we built." On the day the announcement came that he had won, Arif was in Africa, installing solar lights in a remote school. When he heard the news, he smiled, looked at the children laughing under the new lamps, and whispered, "Greater than, this is the real prize." Epilogue. A light that never dies. Years later, when history books spoke of global innovations, the name Arif Mira became a symbol of hope, the child who changed the world not with wealth or power, but with compassion and creativity. His quote was printed on the walls of schools and universities worldwide. "Greater than, you don't need to be rich to change the world. You just need to care enough to try." In the village where it all began, his mother's small mud house still stood, preserved as a museum of light. Inside, behind a glass case, was the first lamp he ever built, rusted wires, a broken bulb, and a single message written beneath it in his handwriting. "Greater than, this light started with love." And so, as generations passed, that little lamp continued to shine, not just through electricity, but through hearts. It was the reminder of one eternal truth. Even a single child, with a dream in his heart and courage in his hands, can change the world forever.